Hello and welcome to the Inside Social Work podcast, a podcast that aims to inspire, engage and connect social workers with other social workers and allied health professionals doing interesting and amazing things across the world. I'm your host, Marie Vakakis. Thank you for listening and I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. Welcome to episode 53 of the Inside Social Work podcast. I can't believe there's been 53 episodes. I'm super excited and nearly at 50,000 downloads, which is just incredible. I am so grateful for all those out there listening and engaging with me through emails and through social media. In today's episode, I chat with Coby Liew, who's an accredited mental health social worker, works in private practice and has a lot of experience working with sexuality diverse and gender diverse individuals, as well as children through things like Lego therapy. So some really cool things that he's doing. In this conversation, Coby and I talk about intersectionality, culture, sexuality, and how we can show up in the space as clinicians. We talk a little bit about vulnerability and some of the things that happen day to day in a private practice setting. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Coby, and if you're interested to find out a bit more about him and his service, you can check out the show notes. For those of you who've been following me on the socials, you'll also know that one of the things I focus a lot on is working with young people and adolescents, and I run a number of trainings both online and face-to-face in Melbourne. So check out the show notes. I'll put a link to some of those in there. I'm running a mental health first aid coming up online in August and one face-to-face in September. And I'm in the middle of a Tuning Into Teens program at the moment, which is going really well. And the feedback has been really positive for both the face-to-face and online delivery. So if you've got some parents or if you're a parent yourself and you think that would be really helpful to learn a little bit more about emotion coaching, check out the Tuning Into Teens program that I'm running. Or if you're interested in learning a bit more about mental health, so anxiety, depression, how to respond to things like suicidality, non-suicidal self-injury, then the Youth Mental Health First Aid one might just be the thing for you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode and conversation with Coby. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Inside Social Work podcast. Today I have a very special guest, another local from Footscray even, close to where I work, Coby. How are you going, Coby?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Could you share a little bit about yourself with the listeners? What's your kind of social work journey and a bit of your personal journey, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So I'm really it's a bit of a special time that because before I got into social work, I actually studied counseling and psychology, and then I didn't know that social work exists. To be honest, because it's not something that we have in Borneo or generally in Asia. And then when I got into social work, then that's when I started realizing that, gosh, this is such a good area of practice that, is so diverse and it allows such a broad horizon. And so I was really intrigued and interested with it. And that's why I got myself into it. And then as the more I know about social work, the more I love it. And then I was able to combine, both psychology and social work together. And then now I'm doing what I'm doing as a psychotherapist and also an accredited mental health social worker. And I own my own clinic in West Melbourne. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's awesome. It's so exciting. You've also been quite involved with kind of local communities in terms of queer and culturally diverse young people? Like, what's the sort of the areas that you tend to work with a little bit more?
Yeah. I work a lot with the LGBTIQA community. That's one of my specializations, supporting, people who identify themselves as LGBTIQA, and then also specializing in working with loss and grief, so people who go through loss and grief, and trauma and abuse. So these are generally the three areas that I work, that but I have a lot of passions in. I have a lot of other passions in other areas as well. But these are the top three that I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. What do so for listeners out there who are thinking of maybe going down a road of being a therapist or even just working with different population groups, what are some of the things that you've learned in your experience with clients around how other therapists and other social workers can work better with those different communities? So whether it's around loss and grief, trauma and abuse, LGBTQI. What are some of the thoughts you have on that?
I think the first thing is it has a lot to do with our own experience. Like, first thing is our own lived experience. That's one thing. And how when you walk through that journey yourself, then you can connect and, resonate with those stories even more at a deeper level. And then the second thing is just try it. Like, it's a bit of a try and error. Like, just if you're interested to work with certain groups of people in the community, then you research it and then you try it and then you work with them and see how you feel about it. So like myself, like, before this, I know that, the people with like narcissistic personality and borderline personality, like, those personality types. But in the past, when I first started, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities working with clients with those issues. But then I sort of like, oh, that is an interesting area that I want to work in as well. So I started researching more about personality disorders, like, and that kind of things. And then I got to know a lot more about it, and I read a lot of articles, and then I started supporting clients with, those issues. And then you get more and more familiar and more skilled in that area. And then that's where you find another one of your strengths, I suppose. Like, yeah, sometimes it's just try and error.
Yeah. I really want to pick your brain around working across different cultures because it's often seen as its own niche. And I wonder if sometimes people overlook that you'll have, I mean, culture spans across all areas. So you need to be culturally competent in drug and alcohol work. You need to be culturally competent in loss and grief. Like there'll be like culturally and linguistically diverse communities have all of those other presenting issues that we see. And so you'll have someone who identifies as gender fluid or gender diverse and be culturally and linguistically diverse. You'll have someone who identify like I think sometimes we forget that that's a broad presentation and then they experience all the other things as well. And then we also have to keep in mind systemic injustices, racism, microaggressions, and that person's lived experience of being either a person of color or even from a culture who, just integrating and kind of adapting to Australian culture is very different.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. Because in the past few years as well, I work a lot with international students. So obviously, like, they come from different parts of the world and, people of color. So like you said, like, when that intercultural aspects comes into play, and then on top of that, you have these different expectations, different way of living, different values and belief, and different sexuality, like, all these things that comes into play. It just complicates life so much to a point where people feel very overwhelmed with it. And then that leads to mental health issues.
Yeah.
I know that in my case, because it's my own lived experience myself. So as a person of color, and then I'm gay, and then just coming from a different backgrounds, like where English is not my first language, like, going through all this discrimination, racism, like, being exploited, like, all these experiences that I have. And then on top of it, dealing with my own mental health, well-being as well. So that's a part. Sometimes I just find it, it's just too much.
Yeah.
And I must say though, like in the past, I do have moments when I thought I should just give up because it's just, like why do I have to deal with so much things? And they're not just happening one after another. They're all happening all at the same time. So
Yeah.
that's where it's really challenging. Like, you can see someone smiling at you when you meet them, but you really don't know what's happening behind that smile. There's a lot of stories behind it, and I think people nowadays are very good at wearing masks, to be honest. Like, they just hide their emotions and they hide, their what they're going through. And because of my own lived experience, so I even though when I meet someone new and they smile and whatnot, I will always be very mindful. That I don't assume that when someone smiles, it means that they're all good.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, how do you use some of that knowledge of your own lived experience to improve your social work practice and your therapeutic practice? Like, how does that translate into what you do in the room with a client or service user?
I think the way it translates is that it makes me become so much more mindful with the way that I work and the things that I say, and how I connect with clients, and using the right terms and the right pronouns, and making sure that I don't make any assumptions on people's, even though I'm from that community and that I'm a person of color, but it doesn't mean that I know or understand another person of color's background or culture, right? So whilst I have the awareness that I don't assume, I try not to assume things. Um, and I think that awareness, helps me a lot in my practice as a social worker and also as a psychotherapist, that when I work with clients that I guess the word being mindful is really very important. Um, and also, like you said before, being culturally competent.
Mm.
If I might add another word is other than being competent, but also have to be cultural sensitive, to the differences that people have. Like, a pain to you might be 10, but a pain to me could be just 5. Even
Mm.
though we might go through similar situations. So everyone is different.
Yeah. How do people start to incorporate a little bit more mindfulness and sensitivity? Like, what are some of the big kind of things that they need to keep in mind when working across different cultures? Or, from your experience, because obviously you can't speak for
Yeah.
everybody.
I think the word that comes into my head is critical reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important in our practice, whether you are a social worker or psychologist or any workers that work with, critical reflection, I think is one of the biggest things, is that we have to constantly reflect on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it, who we're doing it for, and that kind of thing. So I got my social work training from University of Tasmania. And when I did my social work study there, I was really fortunate. I think I'm very grateful that I did my study there, because it was very, very critical, reflective focus. Because a lot of things we just have to not only know how to do things, but we also have to know exactly why you're doing it. And
Yeah.
and I
How
think
how and why?
yeah, and that's really important, because when you know why you're doing it, then that would help you to, like, at least it helped me in my situation. When I know why I'm doing something, it helps me to it gives me motivation, and that I want to do something more to understand how can I do it in a more mindful ways, and what can I do to expand this knowledge. So I think knowing that purpose is really important.
I really like that, the how and why. And I want to talk maybe a little bit later about how do we do critical reflection better. But one thing that was coming to mind as you were talking about cultural sensitivity ha- is knowing what kinds of questions to ask. So, I have a client who she sort of identified as, she said something like, "Oh, as a BIPOC female," and even being able to either ask what that means if you don't know, or having a little bit of knowledge around what that acronym means. But then the fact that she mentioned it made me think there's something about that experience that she wants me to know. And so how do we, to pull out a little bit, like I said, tell me about what the impact that has on you. And it
Yeah.
was a lot of those things you were saying. There's, some microaggressions, there's some racial undertones, some explicit racism on online dating profiles. There's sometimes some fetishization of her particular ethnicity. Like there's a lot of things that we explored by actually saying, I know, like, you identified this way, and so there's something important about that. Like, how do we get better at sort of giving people permission to talk about that because we've made it safe to?
Mm. I think very important is at the beginning, you just
If
have,
you can make sense of that triple barreled question.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's one thing that I like to do at the beginning of the session when I first meet them with my clients, when you're building relationship with them and that trust, I just I always say one thing, like there's one thing that I always ask from you as a client, and then my client would normally say, "Oh, what's that?" And then I always say to them, "All I'm asking for from you is you being yourself." And then they wonder what that looks like. They said, "Oh, you mean like, and then that's when I explain a bit more. I said, like, obviously I'm here to support you. I'm not here to judge you. So it's really important for us to be honest and open to each other in this process. I think by saying those things, right, what I experience in my client session is that often clients straight away, they build that trust, that they know that they can say things, that they're not going to be judged. Um, and that is the first step, is to actually make them feel comfortable that they can say and do things
Yeah.
Without being judged. And also the second thing is to build trust.
Yeah.
Because without trust, I don't think anything can happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I always said to my clients as well, thank you for trusting me, because you have just literally given me the most precious gift in the world. Because we all know that when someone gives you trust, and if you break it, once it's broken, it's broken. No matter how you try to mend it, you try to stick it back together or anything like that, right? You will always see that crack. So, and that's why I said, like, you have just literally given me the most precious gift in the world. And I thank you for that. Thank you so much for trusting me.
I'm really glad you mentioned trust, because I think we sometimes assume trust is just, you know, keeping secrets, or like but, have you thought about, or maybe, like I think of Brene Brown's work around trust, and that is, the boundaries. It's being reliable, it's being accountable, it's
Yeah.
not sharing information. It's integrity, it's being non-judgmental, and giving people a generous assumption. Like building trust, just saying just trust me, that's not, we need to prove all those things to clients, and we need to display it in our interactions with them.
Exactly, exactly. And I think another one very good way of building that trust is the therapist being themselves.
Yeah, that authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. That word, authenticity. I think that's, and vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think these are the two words that have helped me so much in connecting with my clients so far. Like, it's just, I just, in front of my clients, I'm just being myself. Like, to be honest, I'm just an authentic Coby.
Yeah.
Um, I don't sugarcoat things. I don't BS, in front of my clients. And then I connect with them at the deeper level because I actually open up myself, and I mean, this is also have to be very skillful in using that, because if you disclose too much of your personal things, then you might shift the focus of that session. So we have to do it in a very skillful way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
some level of minimal disclosure of your own lived experience actually help to connect with the client at a deeper level.
Yeah.
And that helped to build trust as well, because then they see you not just a therapist, but you are also a human.
Yeah. And I really like that sharing parts of yourself in a very skillful and intentional way.
Yeah.
I think it really does build trust. It really does help. And the few series of podcast episodes that I'm kind of clustering together, a lot of the themes that have been coming up is how do we use what we know work, like what we've learned either as clients ourselves or by listening to other people's stories to improve our practice. And I think our own lived experience can be one of those tools that we look at. How do we bring that into our interactions with people, and how do we share insights and vulnerabilities? Like it's a kind of new way of working. I think where we're not in this, or we have to be mindful that we're in a position of power in a way, but we don't kind of, it's navigating that power over kind of role or title that we're given. And in some industries or some sectors, if a client doesn't comply, in air quotes, they can be discharged from the service. So we do have a lot of power, but how do we then sit alongside someone and kind of support them?
Exactly. I think you just mentioned a really one of the most important things that I think we all working in this space that we have to be very mindful of is how do we navigate that power, and that we have. And because with that power, it comes with great responsibilities, right? We all know that, and also because clients has just literally given their trust on us, and that we have this power on us, so it's really sometimes it can be quite tricky, knowing how to navigate, around this, particularly working with vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because I would say, if you're not careful, you can either make or break someone.
Absolutely. Well, definitely the episode prior to you, we were looking at that, the side effect, there are side effects to therapy. And there are times where we can get it really wrong. And that's not just therapy. I mean, social workers listening or other allied health professionals, there's side effects to a lot of the work we do. If we miss a client, we miss a tune, we can do things that are, forgetful or harmful, or there are side effects to that interaction.
Exactly. And you can imagine, whilst we are on the topic of intercultural, so on top of everything that we're talking just now, and then when the cultural part comes in, and then that carries with all these stigmas and all these prejudices that, like we all know that, in people who come generally from the Eastern culture, talking about death is a taboo topic. Talking about sex is a taboo topic, right? Talking about LGBT, sexuality, that's a taboo topic. Like, people don't talk about those things. So it's just that complicates the whole situation. And to be honest, I have majority of my clients are people of color. And when I work with them and I supported them, they all mentioned that they specifically wants to look for a counselor or a therapist that is from a multicultural background, because they all have been to other counselors as well, right? And I think even I myself, I've been to other counselors as well, but there's just these cultural nuances that that you won't really get, what it really means until you actually live in that culture. I think. I mean, you can have a lot of awareness and a lot of understanding about certain culture and whatnot. Like for example, I'll just take an example, right? The Western culture and the Asian culture, for example, right? The Western and the Asian culture. Um, there is a difference if you just go and spend like a month or two in Asia, and then you said, oh yeah, that's the Asian experience. Like, I know Asian culture, compared to you actually living there for 10 years. Like, that nuances there, like, I'll give you a concrete example. So I went to a counselor one time, and then I said to the counselors, I was talking about thinking about my responsibilities to look after my parents back in Borneo. And because I'm the only child in the family. So ultimately, I would have to be the one that look after my parents.
Yeah,
Right?
we've even had chats about that too.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and to be told that my guilt and belief is made up, I don't think that's very helpful. you know yeah, so that's one thing that an example of like these cultural nuances and cultural sensitivity.
Which it's such an interesting example because, as you were saying, you overted it and it was dismissed. And I think cultural sensitivity or even cultural competence is kind of even being able to voice that as a therapist, even saying, okay, so tell me about your family. I'm like, oh, then I wonder if there is a sense of responsibility to provide for them. Like, if the therapist is able to avert that can build so much trust and confidence, rather than you saying it and then them dismissing it. Was like the pendulum swung too far the other way. So actually,
Yeah.
and it reminds me of some work that it's mainly come out of the US because we don't maybe there just aren't as many as content that I'm accessing here, but around being anti-racist versus just being not racist. And some of the stuff people were saying is, you have to be aware of the impact of that. So this person was talking about the example of Black women of color, in a particular professional context, saying they've been culturally conditioned to have their voices minimized. So not only do you need to be culturally aware, you need to then give them a platform to raise their voice. So
Yeah.
sometimes these cultural competencies is not just saying, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you, is actually saying, I'm aware that sometimes for people with your background or your experience, they struggle with this. How do we bring that to our attention? So it's actually sometimes digging in a bit deeper and pulling that out.
Exactly. And it's very reassuring to even just, I mean, even if the therapist is unsure about it, but it's also very good to just ask.
Yeah.
Like, that by asking, it shows that you're interested. It shows that you are aware and you're mindful and you're not making assumption. And that's why you ask.
Yeah.
So by asking question, I think that's a very good way to get into someone's mind and someone's life. Like talking about cultural sensitivity as well and asking questions. I have an example as well. Like, the questions, like a lot of people when they see people of color, they will ask, oh, where are you from? Or where do you come from? Like, some people would find it offensive to ask, to being asked that questions. Some people are more chill about it. Okay. So I thought, okay, so what is a better way of asking this question? If you're interested to know, someone's background, like how can you ask a questions that doesn't really offend anyone? That is quite neutral. And then I came out with a thought that I thought, maybe I can ask about their heritage. Because that word doesn't really offend anyone, right? So every time when I see someone and I'm interested in knowing where, the background, the culture, I'll always ask, so what's your cultural heritage?
Yeah.
And people will happily share their cultural heritage, and they don't get offended.
Yeah. But saying, where do you come from, I think makes it can imply that you don't belong here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, whereas a lot of the people they were actually born
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So going back to critical reflection, you said that that was a really foundational skill for you, and formed part of your course as well. How do we do that? How do we critically reflect? What are tools that people can use? A lot of the guests on the podcast talk about the importance of supervision and how we need to have, peers. We need to have, we need to create, like, I think our work is an identity and can be, it's more than just a job. But that aside, how do you cultivate critical reflection? Like, what are the things that you do for yourself and that maybe others can kind of take some ideas from?
The first time when I really learned about critical reflection is when I did my social work at UTAS, to be honest. And there is a unit called practice framework. Like, that whole unit is just to explore about our framework. Like, why do we do things? So, if I were to explain it using let's say a bonsai, if I use a bonsai to explain it, right? So the root, from that bonsai, that's where our culture, our values, our belief, our family systems, our upbringing, our childhood, all of that from that roots, starting from that roots. And then it goes all the way to the trunk, and then the trunk represents the use of self. Like, how do we use ourself in the work that we do, and then it goes to the branches and and then the leaves and then the fruits, all of that. So I think when you talk about critical reflection is to really think about those things, like, what is our purpose and what are our core values?
Yeah.
What are our core beliefs? Because values and beliefs are different, right? Beliefs come from your core values, and core values come from the attitude that you have towards life, and then that comes from the purpose that you have in your life. So by knowing those things, I think is the first step, is to actually get to know who we are. I think that's the first step, is to know who we are.
Yeah.
And then the second step, being, in critical reflection, to me, I think is we can examine how we use ourselves in the things that we do. So the use of self.
Which is so important in
Yeah.
in our line of work.
Exactly. Like knowing our boundaries, knowing
Yeah.
our limits, like, knowing who, like the client groups that you feel more comfortable working with, like,
Yeah.
those are really important things. Like, how do you use yourself?
So because that can seem really overwhelming for a graduate social worker to think, oh my goodness, I've just done this degree, probably haven't thought about this at all, gotten into work, and holy crap, now I'm supposed to know myself really well. Like, what are some small things? Like, how can people start cultivating, this self-awareness? Like, what are small things people can do to start figuring this out? And I just wanted to share with you, this is a lifelong journey. This
Yes.
doesn't just, you don't just do it once and stop. But where can you start if maybe this is a blind spot that you haven't really focused on?
Well, for me, I think solo traveling is a very good way of getting to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so because that's actually what kickstarted this whole thing about understanding myself. Like, because I went solo traveling in Thailand, and that was the time where that was the first time when I feel like, gosh, like I just learned so much about myself.
Mm.
Like how I look at the world, how I perceive people, how I perceive poverty, like how I perceive like how people use their power, and also how I use my power, when I go to those places. Like, what makes me uncomfortable
Yeah.
in
How old
certain
were you?
situations. Hey?
How old were you when you did that?
Oh, to be honest, like I did that honestly in 2017. So that wasn't really long time ago, like,
Yeah.
and
Okay, so what I'm hearing people can take from that is to separate themselves a little bit from the stimulation of others and actually spend some time alone to kind of get a sense of what get to know themselves a little bit, but actually sit
Yeah,
with some of that discomfort, maybe that boredom, and kind of push themselves out of their comfort zone in their own company.
exactly. Because when you are with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
then you're looking inwards.
Yeah.
But when you're with others, constantly with others, like,
Yeah.
then you're constantly looking outwards.
So, what about in
Yeah.
terms of how can people do this with their colleagues, with their peers, with supervision? Like, how can they explore some of these things? Because you mentioned the use of self and boundaries and limits and the kinds of presentations that you're comfortable to work with. What are some things that people can do to explore those?
I think one thing is, first of all, building trust with your colleagues or your peers. And then secondly, learn to discuss more like deeper, meaningful conversation with your peers and colleagues. Like, don't be afraid to talk about something more deep or challenging.
That makes me think of our first dinner together. It
I
just went
know.
way too deep, way too quick.
I actually don't think it's too quick though. Like, to me, I just feel like I enjoyed that so much. Like the first time when we caught up, and then the conversation that we have, I feel like within that an hour or 2 hours we caught up, I actually know quite much more about you. Like, obviously, you've got a bigger part that I don't know, but I enjoy that process of getting to know
Mm,
something deeper about you, like
yeah.
something more meaningful rather than just something that is superficial.
Yeah. I think you're spot on with that deeper connection because the last few episodes been some of the things that have been talked about around imposter syndrome. And it's because we don't often talk about what we got wrong that everyone thinks they're alone in this. So if you
Mm,
build that trust with your colleagues or peers, and I've seen some beautiful things where students continue to have like a little peer group or professional networks. Like actually once you can build that trust and go deeper, you can share what's gone wrong and other
exactly.
people can normalize it as well. And then that's where that growth can happen. That's where it opens you
Exactly.
up to say, I missed this client, or actually, I think I made a racial assumption, or I got this wrong. And you can do, once you know better, you can do better, but you need to
Yeah.
actually be brave enough. And it's
Yeah.
really uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that goes to saying, like, the comfort zone is a beautiful place to be, but nothing ever grows there, right? So if we want to grow, we have to be uncomfortable. We have to go
Mm,
through that. And there's no other ways, because otherwise we don't grow.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. Nothing grows in the comfort zone.
Yeah, nothing ever grows. So, and that brings me to and back to the word vulnerability. Like, I love what Brene Brown said. I just love it completely. Like she said one time, she said, vulnerability is the place where you can find hope, love, support, and deeper connection.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Like, and then I started practicing that and be
Yeah.
vulnerable. Like, and then she said another thing, she said, the most beautiful thing about someone is when they're being vulnerable.
Yeah. It's great.
And I just love it so much. And then I decided to be vulnerable. And
Yeah.
also, when you are able to be vulnerable to people, it shows how much strength you have in you.
Mm.
Because for someone to be vulnerable, it's quite scary. It's quite daunting to a lot of people. Is that, oh my God, I have to open up myself, like open things. Like, what are people going to do with that? Are they going to attack me? Are they going to like look at me in a different ways? Like, they're
Yeah,
concerned about a
judge
lot of
me.
things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if someone is willing to be vulnerable in front of you, and to be honest, a lot of my clients, when we talk about vulnerability, they often look at it as a weakness.
Mm.
Yeah. But then I always say to them, do you know how much courage and how much trust someone needs to have in order for them to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So someone who's being vulnerable to you, what that actually means is it's not that they're weak. They're actually very strong in them. Inside them, they're very strong. And that's why they're able to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with you, they want to work with you or refer clients to you, where are you? How can they get in touch? And I'll put some notes in the show notes.
Yes. So two-way. One, you can get in touch with me via LinkedIn. Just go to LinkedIn and just search my name, Coby Liew, Liew. And then, or just go to my website. So it's Leave Your Story, LIVE, leaveyourstory.com.au. So from there, you get, you can connect with me via these two options.
Yeah, awesome. And just as a parting kind of, bits of advice or personal, what do you do to balance, working in this role? So what do you do for self-care and to look after yourself?
That's a very good question. I think the word that comes into my mind is boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really need to, as therapists, like, particularly working in our field, is that we really need to have clear and solid boundaries in our practice. It's like, for example, myself, like I set up all my computers and screen and whatever in the practice, in the clinic. And at home, I've got no computers. So every time when I leave my clinic, and when I leave, I would have no computers for me to work at home. So I must tell you though, like there has been a few times when I thought, oh, maybe I should take my laptop home. Like I just want to do something else, but then no, I thought, okay, that's actually a very good boundaries that I'm setting here. Is like whatever at work is at work. And then I don't, when I go home, then that's a different space for me. And then I just don't work.
Yeah.
So that's how I think it works for me.
Yeah.
As a practitioner. And I think I like to have that distinction. Distinction between work and home. And so that when I go home, and that's a space where I can be myself, relax, and just do what I want, without actually checking anything.
Yeah, great. I do something similar. I don't have my work emails on my phone. I have to sit down, and so a bit of separation is really great because I think we do better work for longer if we can maintain some of these boundaries and self-care.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise it's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah, sure is. Thank you so much, Coby.
Thank you. Thanks for this nice podcast. Enjoy talking about the topic.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Coby. If you want to find out a bit more about Coby, you can check out the show notes. And please leave me a rating or review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps people find the Inside Social Work podcast. And if you're up for it, join the Facebook group, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, or follow me at Marie Vakakis on Instagram. It'd be really great to hear from you, what you're liking about the podcast. What are some of the things you want to hear so I can best serve you all. All right, bye. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. The Inside Social Work podcast would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we record this podcast today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for listening. If you would like to support the podcast, you could leave a rating or a review on iTunes or wherever it is you get your podcast, and feel free to join the Facebook group. It'd be great to hear from you. Have a lovely day. Bye.